Hello, everyone. This will be phase 6 of me fixing the Multiverse Saga. And, well, I gotta say, it's been quite a journey, and I'm just glad that we made it through the ends of it. So, without further ado, let's begin. Kicking off this phase will be Doctor Strange 3. And, to be honest, I'd rather wait to see whatever Marvel has planned, as I feel like it could tie in nicely into the overarching story. Also, I don't want to add anything contradictory so it doesn't impact or affect the Secret Wars movie in a negative way. But I will still think that Doctor Strange and Clea will just be fighting a multiversal threat, so that's how I would think the general plot of the movie would be. After Doctor Strange will be Spider-Man 5. And I don't really have a title in mind, so if you guys have any suggestions, let me know down in the comments. And I would have this movie be fairly street level. So, with that being said, the main villain I have in mind for this movie would be the Chameleon. So, this movie would basically be sort of like a thriller and suspense type of film, sort of like The Dark Knight, in which it's less of a superhero movie and more of a thriller. This would also be a story heavily focused on the duality between Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And so, with that being said, there won't be any other heroes in this movie besides Spider-Man. So, there won't be no Daredevils, no Iron Man, no Toby, Strange, no Andrew, Fury, no Venom, Maria Hill. This will purely be Spider-Man. I would also use this movie as a way to set up Kraven as a future antagonist, as well, some of you would know, the Chameleon and Kraven are actually related since they are half-brothers in the comics. The MCU version of Norman Osborn would also make an appearance in this movie, and he'll be more of a background threat in which he'll be pulling the strings from behind. Peter would also find out that Harry's last name is Osborn, which would ultimately make him super suspicious, and he would keep a close eye on Harry, and more specifically, Harry's dad. The movie would end with the Chameleon being defeated and sent off to Rikers Island, where he would meet up with a particular figure, and that particular figure would also reveal Scorpion from the last movie, setting up a future Sinister Six team up down the line. The next movie of this phase will be the Thunderbolts. And no disrespect to the MCU's actual roster, but come on, like, what are these guys doing against someone like Thanos? Like, come on, man. You gotta be kidding me. I'd rather have the Thunderbolts feature more members with actual superpowers instead of the majority of the team just being, well, spies or soldiers. So the lineup I'm thinking for this team is Baron Zemo, Ghost, Red Hulk, Punisher, U.S. Agent, Yelena, Deadpool, Taskmaster, who will still be Tony Masters, as this is technically his first appearance in a Marvel movie, as the Black Widow movie doesn't exist in my version of the Multiverse Saga. And he would also have a more comic accurate suit. And also, I guess Sentry or Bob would be in the team as well as the Winter Soldier. This team would of course be directed by Madam Hydra, and the general plot would pretty much be the same as it would be in the film when it comes out. Sentry would also still be the main villain, and which would result in the rest of the Thunderbolts into putting aside their differences and facing off against the seemingly unbeatable opponents. Will they succeed? I don't know, you tell me. The next project I have planned for this phase will be What If Season 2. And the general episodes that I have planned out for this series will go as follows. Episode 1 will be What If Tony Stark became the Sorcerer Supreme? So, in this version of events, it would take place at the same time as Iron Man 2, where Tony Stark was having that chest problem, and instead of creating a new element, he would go out and search for help, where he would eventually encounter the Ancient One in the Sanctum Sanctorum, where he would ask for her help, and the Ancient One would be reluctant, but then would agree to train Tony in the mystic arts as a way to help him with his problem. But it would be a much harder time training Tony, as it was at this time where he had an ego, if not bigger, than Strange was. So he would be like more sarcastic and would even laugh at the Ancient One's teachings at times. And Caecilius would also make an appearance in this What If. And the episode would end in roughly the same fashion as it did in the Doctor Strange movie, except now that Tony Stark is the Sorcerer Supreme, he has an Iron Man suit to go along with it, and as well as all of his resources and tech. So that would be pretty interesting to see in another episode down the line. The second episode would still be the same with a young Peter Quill attacking Earth, but I would change the third episode to what if the Avengers became babies? So, as you can tell, this would be a much more lighthearted episode, and it would take place in the events of the Avengers 2012, where after the battle, Loki would attempt to get one last shot at the Avengers. So, he would use his magic to transform all six of them into babies, which would result in both Nick Fury and Maria Hill having to babysit the six Avengers, as well as finding a way to undo the spell. And I would also have the Ancient One make an appearance in this episode as well. The fourth episode with Tony Stark crash landing in Sakaar would still be the same, but I would change the fifth episode to what if Captain America woke up 10 years later? So what I mean by that is he woke up before the events of Avengers 2012. So I would fast forward a bit until where he wouldn't be found until 2022. So that would be in the MCU timeline. That would still be in the 5-year gap in Avengers Endgame. And I'm not too sure how this what if would play out, but I do think it would be pretty interesting in seeing how Captain America would adapt to this even more modernized setting. As for the sixth episode, this might be a weird one to some, but I'd have it be, what if Peter Parker became Ant-Man? And what I mean by that is, this would take place sometime after Uncle Ben's death, so it'll be about a couple weeks after. And Peter would still be stressed, and due to the financial troubles that he and his Aunt May are facing, he is trying to find a way as a means to get money, which would ultimately lead into a circum of events in which he would be on his usual Spider-Man activities. Well, early Spider-Man activities, since he's still trying to get used to his powers, in which he would apprehend Scott Lang, who he sees trying to steal a particular suit. And so Peter would just think that this is just some regular heist and would not think anything of it. That is until he is confronted by an old man and a lady. And that old man would talk to Peter, seeing as how he sees him as a great fit for his Ant-Man suit. Peter would be hesitant at first, but Hank would reassure Peter that he'll pay him handsomely. And since Peter obviously needs the money, he would reluctantly agree. And thus, his first official suit will be the Ant-Man suit. And so the general plot of the episode will basically be as the same as it was in the original Ant-Man movie, except obviously it's Peter in the Ant-Man suit, and along with his spider abilities as well. So that would really make a difference in certain events. Now, as for the seventh episode, it will still be Hela and Wen-Wu joining forces, but I would change the eighth episode to what if Killmonger rescued Tony Stark? So if you watched my previous video, then you would know that I cut this episode out of What If Season 1, so I'm just pushing it far back into Season 2. And now, the ninth and final episode will be, what if the Fantastic Four had lived in the 616 universe? So if you guys didn't know, I'm pretty sure that the Fantastic Four movie coming out takes place in another universe. So that's why we never really saw them before in the mainline MCU movies. So this what if will basically be exploring that what if the Fantastic Four was still in the 616 universe. So I feel like that could really change a lot. For instance, I feel that would be one of the first people that Nick Fury would go to instead of Tony Stark. As well as we could have seen the Fantastic Four fight Loki instead of the Avengers, which would result in the Fantastic Four being the mainline team of the universe instead of the Avengers. So I feel like this what if could go pretty well, and yeah, let me know what you guys think. The next project plans will be Shang-Chi 2. And since we don't have the official title yet, and I'm not talking about the leaked title since we don't know if Marvel intends on changing that title or they plan on keeping it, but just to keep it safe, I'll just be calling it Shang-Chi 2. And this movie would pretty much be whatever Marvel has planned, as again, I don't really want to add anything that would contradict like future movies, so this movie would be whatever Marvel has plans in the future. Following this will be Heroes for Hire Season 2. And this would basically be a continuation of Iron Fist and Luke Cage's adventures as they take up jobs for money. And I would also add Misty Knight to the cast as well, just as a new hero, as well as returning characters such as Black Cat and Moon Knight. Now, as you may have guessed, this will mainly be a street level story, so the main villain is the Purple Man, who in the comics is basically this mob boss who can control people's minds. But the season would of course end with Iron Fist, Luke Cage, Misty Knight, Black Cat, and Moon Knight to defeat the Purple Man and send him off to Rikers. Now the show following this will be Daredevil Born Again, Season 3. And this is where I would really cultivate like all the street level stories in the MCU. So with that being said, this season will see the birth of the Defenders. Well, I guess the rebirth technically. And so the Defenders lineup I'm thinking of will be Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Black Cat, Misty Knight, Moon Knight, and Spider-Man. And the main villain I'm thinking of for this season will be Mr. Negative, hence why I'm adding Spider-Man to the roster. But this would still ultimately be a Daredevil-centric story, and this is to not only test Daredevil's mental fortitude, but his physical capabilities as well. And the season would end with each of the Defenders using their combined effort to stop Mr. Negative once and for all. Now, the movie I have planned after this will be Blade 2. I would not only have this movie be rated R, but I would also have the main villain be Morbius. And I felt that the character was really underutilized by Sony in that awful movie, so I feel like this would be sort of a redemption by having him go up against Blade. Plus, they're both vampires, so I think it'd be pretty cool for them to test their might against each other. After Blade will be The Inhumans Season 2, and this will just be a follow-up on Season 1, just to see where the Inhumans are at right now and how they're dealing with the current events. I would also feature the Fantastic Four in this season as well, just to set up that romantic tension between the Human Torch and Crystal, who have had a past relationship in the comics. And the main villain I would have for this season would be Molecule Man, just as a way to set up not only Secret Wars, but having him introduced before that movie to really hype him up. And if you guys don't know, Molecule Man is seen as one of, like, if not in the top 3 most powerful Marvel characters of all times. So I really wanted to showcase his power in this show. So the season would end not with him being defeated, of course, since that would require a large amount of power from the Inhumans, which they don't have enough to defeat Molecule Man, but just for him to be persuaded, just enough for him not just like kill everyone. So it would end in a bit of a draw. And after the Inhumans will be Captain America 6, or the Serpent Society as I'd call it here. And as you guessed it, the main villain of this movie would be the Serpent Society. And this movie would feature the return of not only Sam Wilson's Captain America, but Bucky Barnes as well as Thunderbolt Ross as the Red Hulk. And the three of them together would join forces to try and take down the Serpent Society. And I really want this movie to be the culmination of Sam's journey as Captain America, seeing as how would be the third movie of his franchise, testing not only his physical capabilities, but his willpower as well. Baron Zemo would also make an appearance in this movie as well as Madam Hydra. Now the next project will be a 45-minute special presentation, which will be The Mutants. And this would follow the adventures of a young Charles Xavier and Magneto as they set out and try to find some mutants in order to support their cause. And this is the way I would officially introduce mutants into the MCU. So this would take place around the 60s, and it'll pretty much be similar to that of X-Men First Class, where we would first see these team of mutants that are trying to save the world. But of course, the world doesn't accept them, and that's why by the end of the special presentation, they are forced into hiding, which is why we never really got to see any mutants participate in any major MCU events. And this would be a setup to a movie following this, which will be The Uncanny X-Men. And this will be the first official time that the X-Men are introduced into the MCU. So with that being said, I'd want the roster to be Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, Beast, Angel, and Professor X. Just for comic accurate purposes, as that was the original X-Men team in the comics. So no, Wolverine will not be in this movie, as one of my biggest gripes with the Fox X-Men universe was how those movies was basically Wolverine and pals and not really a cumulative expansion of the roster. Like, for example, how they underutilized Cyclops. So I wanted to remedy that by making Cyclops the central focus of this movie. And the villains I'm thinking of for this film would be Magneto and the Brotherhood of Mutants. So this would basically be a classic X-Men story, just to get the general audience a general knowledge of what this team is about. The movie following this will be Thor, Battle of the Gods. And this would basically be a God of War type of story where we would see Thor going up against the Greek pantheon, and more specifically, the long-awaited battle between Thor and Hercules, which I wanted to portray sort of like how Superman fought Zod and Man of Steel, as these are basically literal gods fighting. So I wanted to portray that in as much of a whimsical and magical light as I could. The main villain of this movie will be Zeus, with Hercules as a secondary antagonist. But of course, Hercules will see that Thor is a good guy and will ultimately convince his father to not go to war with the world. After this film will be The Fantastic Four 2. And I don't really have any titles in mind, so if you guys have any ideas, let me know down in the comments. So the main villain I'm thinking about having for this movie will be Annihilus. And this movie will essentially be our first glimpse at the negative zone, which is basically an alternate universe where time moves at a different rate and is pretty much a pocket dimension. So I wanted to spend some time exploring that realm, since at heart the Fantastic Four are pretty much explorers first and heroes second. So, and I wanted to make Annihilus as intimidating as possible, and I'd also want to add Dr. Doom as even more setup for the eventual crossover that he'll have against these different heroes. The next project will be Nova, and this will be another 45-minute special presentation just as a way to introduce Nova into the MCU. And the Nova I will be choosing will be Richard Rider, and this would basically be his origin and how he is connected to the Nova Corps, as well as his connections with the Guardians of the Galaxy. And there's not really any particular villain I have in mind, since I'm not really that well versed in the Nova lore. So if you guys have any villains that you would like to see in this special presentation, let me know. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for, Avengers Doomsday. And to be honest, this would apply to the same rule that I set out for Doctor Strange 3, as this would basically go about as how Marvel would plan it out, but except Robert Downey Jr. won't be Doctor Doom, of course, since my choice would be Cillian Murphy. So Doom would ultimately be the main villain of this movie, obviously, and I want to portray him as a really endgame level threat. Like, it takes not only the Avengers, but the Fantastic Four, as well as the X-Men, to take him on. And the movie will ultimately end with Doctor Doom gaining the powers of Molecule Man, which would result in him splitting up multiple worlds into different dimensions, which would lead into the movie known as Secret Wars. And this will be the ultimate culmination between all of these three phases, with Doctor Doom as the main villain, now known as God Emperor Doom, in which he has created a battle world, which is comprised of different universes who are forced to fight each other as a means to survive. And I wanted to portray this as a real battle royale where everyone is just like fighting everyone, and it's essentially a free-for-all. Not to mention, it'll basically be cameo galore, where we'll basically see different heroes from all types of different movies. Like, for example, we'd see the Fox X-Men, we'd see Toby Spider-Man, Wesley Snipes Deadpool. It'd basically be like a fan service field day. And I'm not too sure how Doctor Doom would be defeated. It's been a while since I've read the Secret Wars comics, but for the sake of the story, I'm pretty sure he'll still be defeated by the end, and he'll have one final talk with Reed Richards, and it'll really serve as a way to cement their rivalry and how each of them are connected with one another. Not to mention, this would also serve as a soft reboot of the MCU. So we'll also see the likes of Captain America as well as Iron Man return, but played by different actors. This movie would also feature Spider-Man getting the symbiote for the first time, as per in the comics, where the first time he got the symbiote was in the original Secret Wars. And so, with the battle won and the heroes defeated Doctor Doom, this would expand out into another storyline, in which I would personally like to call the Mutant Saga. But that would be a story for another day. And well, that was my pitch for a fixed MCU Multiverse Saga. And I'd really try to include as much as I could in these phases without it feeling too compacted. And I tried to remove any unnecessary projects so we can just like head straight into the storyline without any obstructions. And let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you all in the next one.